because we got a lot to figure out today, child. We got a lot to figure out today. Hi, Instagram. I'm live on YouTube. Hi, YouTube. Good morning. And welcome to the Lurie Daniel Favors Show on Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action here on SiriusXM's channel 126. Now, we got to talk about the Supreme Court and what they did yesterday. Usually, I say the Supreme Court is off because it's summertime. The Supreme Court ain't supposed to be doing a whole lot of things, but Supreme Court has decided to re-enter the chat, and they're re-entering the chat basically to screw up the school system. Not so much on their own, but really as a part of the Project 2025 effort of destroying schools. Now, I was reminded recently that we have a song about the Supreme Court. I'm going to start with a little song. I hope my voice is in it today. I've been a little scratchy and froggy in the throat. But do you guys remember the song about the Supreme Court? It goes a little something like this. Sam and Martha Alito, Clarence and Jenny, these are the leading hoes on the court. They're hoeing justice for dollars, trading democracies like ours. So Republicans keep power forevermore. Here come the hook. Y'all ready? Sammy and Martha, Clarence and Jenny, these are the main ones who are killing the court. Oh, but they are not alone. These mobsters worse than Al Capone. And Project 25 is their goal. Now, there's more to the verse, but I really just needed to explain to you all the depths of anger that I feel about what the Supreme Court is doing right now. And so sometimes I break out into a little bitty song to basically talk about the Supreme Court. There's more to the song, but for now, I just needed to just let you all be in on my current state of emotion. So let's talk about the Supreme Court and the school system. Actually, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court and Project 2025 and the school system, because for those of you who may remember, we spent a lot of time talking about Project 2025 and how Project 2025 had a very particular plan for the schools all across America. And this school year, let me just tell you, is going to be a doozy. As I mentioned to the audience before, for those of you who have children who are in 3K through 12th grade or who are attempting to go to college or vocational school, God forbid, even the Job Corps. Shout out to Morris Brown for stepping in to help out the Job Corps. Basically, we got problems. And I'm a parent of both now a middle schooler and a rising freshman. So we got some situations to talk about. Now, Donald Trump signed an executive order on March 20th that basically instructed Linda McMahon, who is WrestleMania's dedication and servant of education, I suppose, the woman who couldn't tell the difference between A1 steak sauce and AI. Basically, that woman is in charge of our education system right now. She has no experience as an educator. She is not qualified to be an educator, but she is in charge of the school system right now because she is what? White, entitled, and incompetent, which means that's basically the only qualifications that have to be met for the Trump administration. And according to the New York Times, on March 20th, Donald Trump signed an executive order that basically instructed Linda McMahon to begin shutting down the Department of Education. Now, the Department of Education manages federal loans for college applications and college students. They monitor student achievement and can determine whether or not school systems are failing, whether they're meeting the metrics, whether they're doing excessive expulsions or excessive suspensions, particularly when they're tracking the data. They could also provide that data as it pertains to race. They are also the entity that supports programs for students with disabilities. And Donald Trump basically said, in accordance with Project 2025, he don't like the Department of Education, so fuck it. And that's basically where we're at right now. But I want to first remind all of you about the Project 2025 Vision for America. And this is really going to matter because I need us to recall yesterday's conversation. Instagram, you guys didn't see yesterday's conversation. You should definitely get on YouTube and go check it out. In yesterday's conversation, do you remember how we talked about the racist and anti-poor white roots of fiscal conservatism? And we talked about the fact that after the Civil War, what essentially happened was Black people were finally able to be elected into office. And once they were able to get into office, they collaborated and worked with poor white people who were not more committed to their racism than having education for their children. It was weird because at this time, the wealthy white planters just thought that if they just said, hey, there's some N-words over there and they're in charge of shit, they thought that that was going to be enough to get poor white people on their side. But the poor white people was like, well, wait a minute there, Mr. Byrne. What I see here is some blacks who said they're going to use their electoral power to give us an education, because that's basically what was happening. Black people were getting elected into office. They were creating public school systems, and they were working with poor white people to fill in the economic class gaps that the planter class, the slaving class, had basically abandoned the poor whites to for centuries. And the poor whites were like, well, damn, Clem, I don't got no teeth in my mouth, and the black dudes over there don't have no teeth in their mouth, but they got political power now, and they said they're going to bring a dentist. I need teeth. I want to chew. Hell, Vern, I don't have no school for my kids, but those black guys over there said they're going to create a public school system, and my kids are finally going to get to learn some reading, writing, and arithmetic. I would like that. And so the wealthy white people were like, hold up, wait a minute, oh my God, clutching my southern antebellum alabaster pearls. What we cannot absolutely have happening is the poor whites and the blacks working together. We have worked very feverishly ever since Bacon's Rebellion and beyond to prevent that from ever happening again. So wealthy white people, and this is just a refresher for those of you who missed yesterday, wealthy white people created a class known as the taxpayers. And the taxpayers were a class that basically was just people who owned land who were wealthy. And what did the taxpayers say? They said that we as taxpayers, who are taxpayers because we own the land, we are the most wealthy in the land. We don't want to pay taxes for a group of people like the blacks and the poor whites who basically don't own enough to be able to pay taxes. And so because the poor people are in charge now, you want us to pay taxes for the poor? You want us to provide services for the society? And this is being mandated by the poor whites and the blacks over whom we used to exercise all the power. So they created this identity known as fiscal conservatives. And as fiscal conservatives, they refuse to tax and spend for anything. They don't like the ability for the government to require you to pay money for a public school system. And that fiscal conservative mentality is really at the heart of what we're going to be talking about today. So with that backdrop, let's remind ourselves of what Project 2025's vision was for the Department of Education. Project 2025, as a reminder, was essentially a blueprint that basically was going to reshape the entire federal government, make the president a king, and essentially allow far-right policies to become the new law. It's a program that essentially says we don't like any of the civil rights gains. We don't like the fact that 50 years ago, a woman she had to require her husband to be able to open up a bank account, and now she doesn't anymore. We don't like the fact that you all can go to school and learn things about your woke DEI that we don't like, and it makes us very, very nervous, and we don't like it anymore. They don't like the fact that you have SNAP and food stamps and Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare because they're greedy, selfish motherfuckers who don't want to use any of their money or their resources to benefit anybody else. It's part of the American lexicon. Anyway, this 900-page plan, which we read together here on this show. If you weren't part of the show, then sorry you missed it, but we tried to put it out on social media. Basically, according to Project 2025, as it pertains to public education, there's a difference between public education and Christian religious education, which we're going to get to in a minute. But according to the Project 2025 plan for public education, there would be essentially an elimination of Title I. And Title I is a program that basically is designed to help poor children. Children go to school like those poor white farmers' kids needed to in the end of the Reconstruction era. And that would eliminate 180,300 teaching positions. They are also planning to end preschool Head Start. And they already ended the funding for Head Start. People had to fight to get it back. And they got it back successfully. But now that the Supreme Court did what they did, we're going to have another fight because every fight that we won to get back what was taken from us in terms of education, now we have to fight again because of what the Supreme Court did yesterday. So 800,000, that is the number of preschoolers, toddlers, and infants who are going to lose access to early learning programs under Project 2025's elimination of Head Start. Now, the National Education Association has a phenomenal write-up about this, as does pretty much every other educational program or system that is out there, because this was not hidden. This is something that people were crystal clear about because they wrote it in their book. The manifest, they wrote it down. And so Project 2025 promises to, quote, dismantle the Department of Education, a vow Donald Trump repeated over and over on the campaign trail. Betsy DeVos, who was the head of education under the first Trump administration, also tried to do this during the first administration, and she was not able to do so. But overall, the goal of Project 2025 is to, quote, strip the federal role in education down to that of a, quote, statistics gathering agency that disseminates information to the states. And even the ability for the Department of Education to gather statistics is going to be threatened because they don't actually plan on keeping the people on staff who would do the statistics gathering. Free of federal oversight, says the NEA, a second Trump administration would be able to turbocharge key tenets of the extremist anti-public education agenda that are already being implemented at the state level in many parts of the country. So you know how in a variety of states like Arkansas and in Arizona, we talked about this before, they have gone to and shifted to what's called a voucher system. And in the voucher systems, what it essentially does is it basically says you can use this money that used to go to your child going to public public school, if your child went to public school, and use it to pay towards a private education. The challenge is that most vouchers do not actually cover the price of private education. An additional challenge is that once you're private education, an additional challenge is that once your child, if you have enough money to fill in the gap between what the voucher covers and the remaining balance, and they go into this private school system, it's not like you have a Department of Education that you can complain to. It's the board of directors of that particular school. Maybe it's a church-based institution, maybe it's a hedge fund-based institution, but there is no broader system of rights that you as a parent now have. It's whatever the hedge fund or the owners of that voucher school's accepting system that private school will allow. In addition to that, what ends up happening, and we know this from studying the way vouchers have been rolled out across this country, is that because the vouchers are never really enough for you to be able to pay private school, what basically happens is vouchers go to wealthy parents whose children are already in private school, and it just means that they pay less. Because ever since they became fiscal conservatives and taxpayers, the wealthy whites have never really wanted to do anything that was going to cause them to benefit other people than themselves who are wealthy. They also plan to, according to Project 2025, since 1965, says the National Education Association, Title I has provided critical financial help to high poverty schools and districts. Project 2025 plans to eliminate Title I funding entirely. Do your kids live in a poor district? Do your children attend school in a poor district? The funding that your school system was receiving in order to be able to meet the needs of the poor children in that school, that's gone under what the Supreme Court basically allowed the Trump administration to do yesterday. In its place, says the National Education Association, states will receive no strings attached block grants with zero regulations or oversight. So those of you who live in communities that are already traditionally abandoned by your state and local government, just know that that's going to expand, it's going to spread, and it's going to basically impact poor people all across your state. They say, according to the plan under the Project 2025 effort, tight education budgets that are already tight will be further strained, undermining the academic outcomes of 2.8 million of the nation's most vulnerable students. Now, removing Title I funding would also mean losing thousands of teachers and ultimately limiting children's access to quality education, according to Will Ragland, who is the Vice President of Research for Advocacy and Outreach at CAP. It would also be devastating to local schools, students, families, and communities, because here's the thing about removing services from poor children who need it. It's not like y'all are going to disappear. It's not like poor kids are going to disappear. They're still going to be at schools, and they're still going to show up with needs that your school system is going to have to figure out. And what that means is that the benefits that other children were receiving are going to have to be cut to make room for the poor children in your community to also get their education. According to Denise Specht, who is the president of Education Minnesota, if Project 2025 succeeds in gutting this funding, students are not going to get the support that they need, and the staff delivering these services and support will lose their jobs. We need to be able to employ more staff, not take staff away from our programs. And again, Project 2025 does call for the end of Head Start, and it does call for the end of programs that would allow for parents to show up for their students if your students are not white. Now, they are going to allow for a parents' rights approach, and by parents' rights, they mean white parents, because we already know how this plays out, because look at what happened with Moms for Liberty. When Moms for Liberty came up and they said, well, we want parents' rights, and we want the ability to determine what sorts of schools, systems, and programs are going to be employed. We want to be able to determine what sorts of books you're going to be able to use. They took out the books that black parents needed for black kids. So it's not that they said we're going to take out books that hurt all children. They took out the books that were books that parents like myself, advocates like many of you, had fought to get into the school so that our black children would have access to a culturally competent education. So this is not all parents matter. It's white women parents matter, and particularly the white women who are part of the Moms for Liberty ethos. Now, what does this mean, and why does this matter today? Because in addition to everything else that I said, they will also allow for the codification of discrimination against LGBTQ plus and trans community student members, against black community members, Latino members, Asian members, so on and so forth. And it would basically give Donald Trump and his vision of education in this country carte blanche to be able to do whatever the hell it is that they want with our education system. And President Biden, when he was in office, had basically put in place a number of rules that said, listen, we're not going to discriminate. You might not like the trans community, that's fine, but you ain't going to get to discriminate against them. And now under these rules of Project 2025, those sorts of preventions against discrimination are no longer present. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, Lurie, I am a black, and as a black, I don't also like the gays or the trans. And that might be a fine statement for you to make. Just know know that every single time we use the gay or the trans community, or the LGBTQ plus or the trans community as a way of allowing some sort of discrimination, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from discriminating against them to discriminating against us. So do with that what you will. Cut off your own nose to spite your face if you wish, but I'm not going to join you in that effort. Now, why does this matter today? It matters today because yesterday, the freaking Supreme Court, which is a bunch of hoes, except for Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and Justice Alana Kagan. Those three justices are not hoes. It's the other ones who are, including Amy Coney Barrett. They're hoes, and they're hoeing for sugar billies. Sugar billies who are billionaires that have, they're like sugar daddies, but they got billions of dollars, and basically they can buy Supreme Court decisions. Yesterday, the Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to dismantle the education department by firing more than 1,000 workers. According to the reports, this order is, quote, a significant victory for the administration and could ease President Trump's efforts to sharply curtail the federal government's role in the nation's schools. According to the report, Trump has announced that they are going to fire more than 1,300 workers, essentially gutting what is left of the Department of Education, which again manages federal loans for college, tracks students' achievement, and enforces civil rights in the school system. They began this year, the education department, with more than 4,000 employees. They now have a paltry sum of that, and they have also fired probationary workers. They've given early retirement packages, and basically, at the end of it, they're going to have a workforce less than half the size that they started out with at the beginning of this year. Remember when we had Sharia Wright on this show? And Sharia was one of the union workers who was a part of the educational department, and she was one of the people who was advocating for the workers there. And what did she tell us? Because I asked her, I was like, listen, sis, and I asked her this on air. I was like, hey, just asking for a couple million of my friends. I have a child who's about to go to college this year, and we're filling out the FAFSA. I don't know what financial aid we're going to get, but we're filling out the FAFSA. She said, yeah, whether you need that financial aid or not, you can fill out the FAFSA all you want. The question is, when are you going to actually get a response? Because ain't nobody who used to review the FAFSA applications, they ain't there no more. They not there no more. Ain't nobody working no more. And so you might have a FAFSA application, and hopefully you got yours in early enough that you already got a response. But even if you got a response, if you are then going to be thinking about, perhaps I have to look at some student loans, from some federally subsidized loans for my child to continue school. Cletus, who gonna process them loans? Who reviewing them loan applications? Ain't nobody working. The lights is off. Ain't nobody working there no more. Now, what's crazy about this is that this is a temporary order because the substantive meritorious elements of this case are still winding their way through the lower courts. What happened was the district level courts had said, wait a minute. Y'all are still figuring this shit out. We ain't even got to the merits of the case yet. You already firing people. You might lose the case. Why are you firing people now? You might not, just because you filed a case don't mean you're going to win the case. You might lose the case. We can't have people just fired and the education system not functioning while we're figuring out whether or not you have the authority to end the education system at all. This is an interim order. And so we are in a moment right now where there is nobody going to be working at the Department of Education, even though the question about whether or not Trump can dismantle the Department of Education is still being decided at the lower courts. But the Supreme Court, the hoes of the court, basically said, well, we don't give a good goddamn. We're just going to allow you to shut it down and then they can figure it out later. Why? Because the Supreme Court is a compromised bunch of bitches. That's what it is, except for Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan. They've been bought and sold. We've seen this with a variety of opinions, and now it's coming home to roost. So here's what's really important about this. Because remember that story I started out with, and I made the connection between what black people were doing after the Civil War when they just were able to begin electing themselves into office? What's one of the first things that they decided to do? One of the first things they decided to do was to create a public education system. And despite the fact that they were quickly run out of office, and that effort was ended with a lot of violence, because what the taxpayers decided to do after they organized themselves in a way to dismantle the capacity of the poor blacks and the poor whites from actually ruling and raising taxes, that's where we see the birth of the Ku Klux Klan. They used nothing more than racist, terroristic violence to take the tax assessors, the people who were then, because after black people elected themselves into office, they were raising taxes so that they could fund a public school system. They had positions known as tax assessors who would go around collecting the tax. And you know what them white boys did? These taxpayers created the Ku Klux Klan and began violently kicking them out of office. There was one incident, there were a number of massacres where basically every black elected official was assassinated. Their ability to collect those taxes was ended because they were forcibly removed. And every effort that those early voters, those black voters and the poor whites who were creating the first effort of integration 1.0, everything they were trying to do to fund the school system was eradicated. But black people's first effort after enslavement, one of their first efforts after enslavement was the education of our children. We have since the Brown versus Board of Education decision, where black people were fighting for equitable resources, and what they got was integration. We saw after Brown versus Board of Education, within a decade, that 40% of the education, black educators had been pushed out of the education system. We saw that within a decade after Brown versus Board of Education, which was the Supreme Court decision that said separate but equal in schools is unconstitutional, we saw that what ended up happening was up to 90% of the black superintendents and principals were driven from the public education system. And our children have had an achievement gap that started with Brown versus Board of Education, ain't been closed since. What we know is that when black children, what we know is that when all children are taught by black educators, they do better in school. Now, this is not to say that all black educators are amazing, because we have a kinfolk situation with black education as well. And I'm not going to suggest that black educators are exempt from that. But what we do know is that when done correctly, children perform better when they are taught by black people. Just like we know that when there is a black person who is a medical doctor in a county, healthcare services for everybody improves because other white doctors are on notice that there is a black person present. And so for some reason, we all seem to get better healthcare, not just black patients, white patients as well. What we know is that when black women have a black OBGYN, we tend not to die at the hospital. So we're in a moment right now where white leaders have decided they want to destroy the federal educational system. And that is going to cause pain. It is going to cause travail, but it is also an opportunity. Because despite the fact that we have had a Department of Education, our schools today, particularly in places like New York City, more segregated now than they were prior to the Brown versus Board of Education decision. So what this provides for us, I believe, is an opportunity for us to remember what was it like to be able to have access to education that we controlled for ourselves. What would it be like for us to pull the educational genius out of our historical records and closets and employ it for our children? What would it be like to create African-centered Saturday schools? I know what it's like to create African-centered Saturday schools because I've done it. And it's an amazing exercise, and it is a phenomenal thing. We would have children who are living in homeless shelters, black children who would come into our African-centered Saturday programs, which we provided them for free. And we partnered with the Department of Education, the State Department of Education, and basically would have the children who were the fighters, who were some of the shooters, the children who were considered the throwaways, the castaways. We would have them doing Harambe circles, screaming red, black, and green. You know what I mean? Say what? And we would hype them up with a Harambe circle in the morning, give them a good breakfast, following the Freedom Schools model that I taught under the Children's Defense Fund program of Freedom Schools, which is amazing. And they would be learning. They would be writing. They would be reading. They would be expanding their brains. They became scholars. What that tells me is what the devil meant for evil, the Lord can turn around for our good if we would believe in ourselves enough and believe in our children enough to do what is necessary to provide them the educational resources that can't nobody else give them. Is it going to be hard? Yes. Is it going to require us to do a whole lot of hemming and a hawing and a coming together and a collaborating? Yes. But will it give us an opportunity to be our best selves? Will it give us an opportunity to ensure that black children have what it is that they need without the disruptions of the others? I think that's also possible. And if that's the case, and if these people have said, we're just not that into you, we don't want to be with you, we don't want to connect with you, we're just not that into you. If that's the case, well then, baby, it's mutual. For those of us who got our righteous minds back, and we now have an opportunity, and it's going to have to be an opportunity because they just said, we don't like you and we don't want you here. So what are we going to do? Force ourselves into a relationship that they don't want to be in with us? No. We're going to do what's necessary for our children because our children deserve the genius. We're going to do what's necessary for our children because can't nobody else educate our babies the way that we can. And we're going to do it quickly. We're going to organize. We're going to collaborate. We're going to figure out how to build community because, frankly, we solve our problems best, and it's really important that we remember that. We are going to get ready to go to commercial break. Instagram, we